First off, they're not letting these guys come back. They keep sending them back. You know, they come back and then they're redeploying them and stuff. But I would say that, you know, like there's some differences. You know, back in Vietnam days, they didn't even have an awareness of what we call post-traumatic stress now. It was actually through Vietnam Veterans Against the War we started calling it post-Vietnam syndrome and began having rap groups here in New York. And that was the pioneering efforts to create what's now called PTSD rap groups. In fact, I had the privilege recently of being on a panel with Robert J. Lifton, who was a psychiatrist who was instrumental in doing that. And he's up in Boston now. So today there's an awareness of war trauma as an emotional wound. The VA hospitals, you know, anytime there's a war, VA hospitals the funds tend to be cut from social programs and put into war programs. And we see that back in those days they were pretty poor. But we see that happening again today because right now they're trying to close the Manhattan VA. The other thing that I think is significant to look at is that a lot of these soldiers coming back, I mean, in the first Gulf War, over a third of the people are now considered disabled by the VA, many of them from chemical toxins, because many of the battlefields today are extremely toxic, you know, depleted uranium, other things like that. In the Vietnam War, they were using Agent Orange, dioxin, and chemicals like that. But in both cases, you know, we had people being poisoned and coming back. And listen, after a war is over, or after you're out of the military, the government looks at you like a used, like I say that you look at a veteran like a condom, use once and throw away. Because, you know, once you're out of the military and they're not sending you to fight, you become an expense they don't want. So they're going to try and cheap change you every way they can. They make all the promises when you're in the Army, but once you're out, they want to say, oh, that's an additional expense. We'd rather spend our money on new weapon systems than on our old soldiers. So it's a constant struggle. This has always been the case in this country since the beginning, if you actually study the history of the treatment of veterans in this nation. And it's probably been true around the world, you know. But I can only speak from my experience, and I would say that these young veterans coming out are going to face some of these same problems. The difference is that when we come back from Vietnam, the older generation of veterans, the World War II veterans, they turned their backs on us. They didn't want to have nothing to do with us. See, a lot of people say the protesters spit on you, but I say that's mostly an urban myth. You know, there were sometimes people who were hostile to the soldiers. There was also soldiers who were hostile to the protesters. You know, but the idea that they were spitting on veterans is nonsense. But the older generation of veterans did not reach out their hand to support us. They used to say we were long-haired dope fiends and things like that, and crybabies, and they didn't treat you the same way. And we learned from that. We have a saying, never again will one generation of veterans turn their back on another. So these younger veterans have the fact that all the Vietnam veterans, and I think this is true across the board, extend their hand in solidarity to them. So they have more of a support system to them. As far as the government goes, hey, the government is trying to cut everything. You know, like you have, you know, in the bottom line, it comes down to it's either guns or butter, you know, to use an old phrase. You're either going to buy the guns or you're going to take care of the people. And I think it's pretty clear where the current administration is coming from, you know. And the current Congress. It ain't just Bush, it's the Congress too, you know. They don't mind blowing the deficit out for a war, but when it comes to taking care of schools or hospitals or any of those things, homeless veterans, you know, you're an afterthought. Yeah, they'll throw you a little money, but you know, it's just so because advocates bitch, they say, okay, we'll do this. But it's not like really trying to resolve a social problem. Because they're not about resolving social problems, they're about keeping social discontent down. You know, I think if you look at the Vietnam War, there was 3 factors that led to the end of the Vietnam War. One was the armed resistance of the Vietnamese people was, you know, like no matter what people say about America won the war, the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese were fierce fighters who kept struggling for their country. They were like the patriots that we'd blow off firecrackers for every 4th of July. The second factor was there was a worldwide movement, including in the United States, the government was isolated by international opinion, including growing anti-war movement in the United States. And the third factor was the military, the U.S. military, began to disintegrate. People began to refuse fighting. I mean, there came a point where guys would not go out on search and destroy missions, they'd go out on search and evade missions. Because it came, guys would start saying, am I going to be the last man to die before we leave? You know, and I think that at the beginning of any war, people go in there all gung-ho. Now in Iraq, you're starting to, I can't tell you if we're starting to see that dynamic because I'm not there. I've heard some reports, but you know, the mission is no longer clear why people are fighting there. And that makes people not being willing to put themselves out on the line so much because what are you dying for? You got to have a cause to die for, you know, to fight for. And I think that the international opposition to the to this war is greater than the Vietnam War in a sense. Well, I don't know, maybe not greater, but it's certainly very visible. The resistance in Iraq takes on violent and non-violent forms, and it's at a lower intensity though. So it's hard to make an analysis using that framework, but I believe that the key thing we can do is keep arousing the American people to demonstrate against this war, and because we started out, when the war started, we were like, what, they said the polls were showing we were, I don't know, some polls said we were down to 10%, but I thought those were bogus. But now they admit the American people are divided 50-50, and that's probably not even accurate because, well, I live in this area, so up here we're probably 75-80% against the war, you know. But I think the main thing is to just keep struggling against the war, standing up, speaking out. I think that we have to try and remove Bush from the White House, but I don't think that solves the problem. All I think that does is creates a new set of conditions for what we need to do, because we got to get rid of Bush and then get our foot up Kerry's ass. You know, that's the way we should do it. And I think what the biggest mistake, you know, the Europeans have criticized American progressives for years for saying we only react when there's a dire situation, and then we go back home and sit on our asses and turn on our TV till the situation gets bad again. What you need to do is continue building a social movement that's actually moving to an offensive stance, trying to achieve peace and social justice. And I think if there's any time where we better get that lesson straight, it's now. Because if we think of beating Bush and getting Kerry in there solves the problem, we just deluded ourselves and wasted our time being out there. And the challenges are greater, man. We're living in a global society today where the corporations are running the whole country, and democracy is a word, and corporate profits is the reality. And so the only solution is to organize the people in their thousands, millions. We had 500,000 people out here the other day, man, you know. So we're on that path, and we just got to keep moving in that direction. And if you look at it like it's a short-term thing or a place to come to a demo to get laid, you're doing the wrong thing. If you look at it like we're out here because we're going to keep fighting and we're going to pass this on, it may take a whole nother generation. But as long as we keep fighting and passing the torch on, and the young people are out here, then eventually we will win.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.